Ahoy, and welcome back to Leia's Library. Find yourself a cozy corner, get yourself a cozy drink, and let's get started. It's spooky season, and you know what that means. On top of it being the best time of year, it also is the best time of year to read spooky books. So here are my favorites. I'm spilling this all over my hand. It is scalding me. And now my cat has decided to eat her lunch. Thanks, Hamlet. If you hear munching noises during any part of this video, it's just my cat. There she goes again. Her name is Hamlet. I love her dearly, but she is kind of a jerk, says every cat owner ever. So, right, spooky books. It's just not going to stop. We're just going to power through. So, spooky books. These are my personal favorite spooky book recommendations. They're not all necessarily horror books, although I think most of them are. And I'm saying spooky books instead of scary books or horror books because I don't really know if they qualify as like scary per se. I tend to not really get scared when reading, but I do sometimes get spooked, and all of these ones spooked me to varying degrees. So yeah, I thought it would be the perfect time to share them. Let's get into it. Seriously though, I was not born with teeth this large to not play creatures at some point. Why have I never been cast as a creature? Look at these. They just keep going. I also have a concussion while filming this, so if I sound a little bit more erratic than usual, it's just the brain trauma. Don't worry about it. Okay, let's actually get into it. So first up, I have to put this down. It's so hot, and I apparently can't hold it properly because I keep spilling it all over myself, and it hurts. So we're gonna let that cool down a little bit while we talk about the first one on the list, which is Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. This is an adult paranormal gothic horror. So Hill House is notorious for being one of the most haunted places in the world, if not the most haunted house in the world. And knowing this, occult scholar Dr. Montague gathers 3 strangers in the house in hopes of finding solid evidence of a haunting. Each of these guests has already experienced the supernatural to some extent or other, and each of them expects their stay to be at most, somewhat spooky, maybe have an encounter that doesn't really have an explanation, but could. But the longer they stay, the stronger the house's hold gets on each of them. This is a classic horror novel, and for good reason. It has a very slow, gradual build-up that just starts out with some minor, trivial things that could be explained away with very rational reasonings, but then it escalates, and it escalates, and it escalates. It's masterfully built up. And I don't tend to get super frightened by books, like I said, but this one actually scared me a little bit. So major props to it for that. It's a very good classic haunted house story, and I really wish I owned it so that I could reread it this year, but all of the copies were sadly already taken at my local library, so I'll just have to wait. If you've seen the Netflix show of the same name, it is based on this book, but they are 2 very different stories. I love both of them. I think they're both great in their own separate ways, but they are very different stories. So if you are thinking of reading this after watching the Netflix show and really enjoying it, just go in knowing that it's very, very different. But yeah, I love how it builds up, how the scares build up, and the tension that just keeps ramping up and up and up and up. And I love the perspective we get from Eleanor, and I just think it's so good and so creepy. 10 out of 10, spook. Next one on the list is Poison by Chris Whitting. This is a YA fantasy horror. It is about a young teenage girl named Poison, who lives in the Black Marshes, which is this very dangerous place to live. Every creature that lives in the Black Marshes has the potential to kill you quite easily, probably without even trying. And that's where she grows up, and she is well known for being very stubborn and very contrary. So when her baby sister is stolen by fairies, she immediately sets out to bring her back, no matter the cost. So I've talked about this book a couple times. It is one of my favorite books, and it is a sort of anti-fairy tale with horror elements strewn in or woven in. The horror is quite central to the story. The atmosphere is very horror-like. It's very, very creepy. It definitely reads like horror. Poison and her lovely little found family run into all sorts of things, all sorts of spooky things on their trip to the fairy realm, including a giant carnivorous bone witch who wants to use their bones in her soup. I'm a man who, for all intents and purposes, looks like he drowned a decade ago and yet is somehow still alive, if you can call it that. And the most disturbing woman, whose husband is a giant spider. Just goes to show there's someone for everyone, huh? I really enjoy this book, and I think the spookiness is just perfect. It's a perfect level of like, no, it won't keep me up at night with my vivid imagination, but it will have me thinking, wow, I sure am disturbed right now. So it's a perfect read for spooky season. And I think, if I remember correctly, it even opens with like a Halloween adjacent sort of festival or holiday. So it's meant to be. This is your sign to read it right now. Next up is another Chris Whitting book called The Haunting of Alaizabel Cray. This is a YA steampunk horror. Ooh, I don't come across many steampunk books. That's fun. Is this cool enough to hold? Not really, but we're gonna try anyway. So this follows a 17-year-old witch hunter named Thaniel. So in this world, there are like creatures and monsters that exist sort of in the shadows that, you know, endanger the population. And witch hunters are in charge of hunting down these creatures and getting rid of them. They're essentially witchers. If that's a more familiar term for you, they are witchers, but without the mutations. So while on one of these hunts with his mentor and friend Catherynne, they run into Alaizabel Cray. Alaizabel, they quickly discover, is possessed by something, and whatever creature has possessed her has turned her into an unearthly magnet for all sorts of horrors and creatures that lurk in the shadows. So Thaniel and Kathleen discover that Alaizabel might prove a threat to all of humanity and set out to find the cause. This, I think, was the first book, or one of the first books that I read that scared me so much that it kept me up at night. And granted, I was 12 or 13 at the time. Was I even old enough to be reading this? But yeah, I was 12 or 13 at the time, so thresholds may vary. But there are just some things in this book that deeply disturbed me. Some of the monsters and creatures are truly imaginative, much to the demise of my 13-year-old self's mind. I would stay awake staring through my bedroom door into the hallway beyond, just waiting for one of these monsters to come around the corner. It was a great time. I haven't read it in several years now. I think the last time I read it, I was 15, maybe? But I'd love to pick it up again to see how much of it still holds up for me. Because at the time, despite it, you know, scaring me to my core, I did really enjoy it. And I wonder if I would still enjoy it as much. I'm pretty sure I would still enjoy it, but I wonder how much. But, you know, all that said, it has a very definite spooky atmosphere. And it's also a great place to start if you are just starting to get into reading horror and don't really know where to start. Alaizabel Cray. Next spooky book is Coraline by Neil Gaiman. This is a children's horror, and it is about a young girl named Coraline who has just moved into a new house with her parents. And her parents are quite busy and don't really have time to play with her or spend time with her. So she spends most of her time exploring, which is how she ends up finding a mysterious door that leads nowhere. That is, until at night, when she opens it to find a secret passage leading to another house that's just like her own. Only everything is somehow better. The toys are better, the food is better, but there's something else in the other house. There's Coraline's other father and her other mother, and she wants Coraline to stay with her forever. So this may be a children's book, but don't let that fool you. The spook factor is real. This is a book that I started reading at probably around 9 p.m. one night, and I finished it at around 11 p.m. And I thought, okay, time to go to bed now. And I turned off the lights and immediately turned them back on and was like, you know what? I might actually just read something a little bit more pleasant before going to bed. I don't know if it's quite scary, but it is very spooky. The chanting rats, they got me. They freaked me out. See, chanting rats, can I find a place with the chanting rats? The chanting rats. Chanting rats, chanting rats, chanting rats, chanting rats, chanting rats. We are small, but we are many. We are many, we are small. We were here before you rose. We will be here when you fall. Coraline is not concerned enough about these rats. If I heard that, I'd be out. I'd be like, bye, Mom and Dad. Have fun in the murder house. I'm out. Children are scary. If you've seen the movie, they did make some changes for the movie. I still enjoy the movie, but I do think the book is better. I just enjoy it more. And this is another excellent book if you're just starting out with horror and don't really know where to start, or you're trying to just kind of dip your toes in. This is nice because it is horror, but it is, intended for children. I don't know, some places call it YA, but it's definitely written like a children's story. It's just terrifying. And also Neil Gaiman, if I remember correctly, wrote this for his young daughter who wanted to read scary books. So he wrote it for her. Although I think he didn't finish it until she was almost an adult, so that didn't work out. But he had it for his other small child, so it worked out in the end. And we have come to the last entry on the list, which is Comfort Me with Apples by Catherynne and Valente. This is an adult horror novella, and this is about Sophia. And Sophia lives a perfect life in a perfect house with perfect neighbors and a perfect husband. So what does it matter that her husband spends so much time away most of the day at his work? Or that the neighbors never really directly answer any of her questions? Or that the basement door is locked and Sophia is not allowed to go in there under any circumstances? It doesn't matter. Everything is perfect. Right? This is a novella, so it's quite short. So it's like a perfect bite of creepy, disturbing spookiness. The writing in this is really beautiful, which makes it all the better because it works like as such a contrast to the disturbing imagery it's describing. So that's really fun. The twist is also really enjoyable. I really liked it. I thought it was really clever, the hints we got sort of strewn through it. I can't say too much about it because it's so short and I don't want to spoil anything, but it would definitely be a good spooky read for spooky season. So I would highly recommend picking it up, especially if you're looking for something that's a little bit on the smaller side. And those are all my spooky recommendations. Let me know what your favorite spooky book is down in the comments if you have one, or let me know what you thought of any of these. And if you'd like to find me elsewhere, you can find me at Instagram at Leia Like the Princess. On Instagram, you can also find my embroidery and art store, Moonlit Cat Creations, or you can go directly to the website at moonlitcatcreations.com. Thank you for watching, and until next time, Stay spooky.